Story 1. I lit my 8th cigarette before noon, the flames dancing in the trembling cup of my hand, the usual tap, click, draw, exhale. I began each morning with this ritual, as if the cigarette were a small beacon that showed me the world was not yet complete. The tobacco always smelled the same, bitter with a hint of roasted earth, and the smoke seemed to cleanse me of all that was superfluous. I didn't know what I needed more, this habit or the need to have some control over this unmanageable life. 3 packs of cigarettes a day became the norm, then 4. Sometimes I exceeded the limit when I couldn't sleep at night and sought solace in smoke, as if that light breath could stop or at least slow down what I felt inside. In the rare moments when I managed to get some sleep, I woke up, clenched my teeth, and continued. It wasn't a choice, it was an obligation. I often thought that if I could see myself from the outside, I would not recognize myself. It was not me, but something that took over my body and thoughts, absorbing me. The lightness in the body gradually disappears, and in its place comes something heavy, constant, and filling everything around. Coffee. It became part of the morning ritual too, but coffee was a friend, making me feel alive, invigorating, burning, with a strong aroma, like a reminder that the day was just beginning and that there was still something to do, albeit with difficulty. But I quickly realized that coffee was a lie. It did not give me strength. It did not make me move forward. It only hid the moment when I felt my emptiness growing in my chest. I knew that this ritual was not saving, but I continued. My apartment used to be a cozy place, not rich, but enough to feel at home. Quiet, clean, calm. But gradually everything changed. Now it was complete chaos. Ashtrays overflowing with cigarettes stood in every corner. Coffee grounds dried on the old table. A mixture of burnt tobacco and sour food hung in the air, and the windows were covered in dust, through which a dim light penetrated. I didn't notice how it came, this dirt, this ash, this stinking apathy, but it became my home. Now I didn't even notice the smell. It became a part of me. My fingers were turning yellow. It was a strange process, gradual, almost imperceptible. Once I could wear white shirts, once my hands didn't look like they did now, but they were my hands. Habits like that, like pieces of my old life that I kept clinging to, they kept me afloat in my reality, where everything was the same, where I could control at least something. But I knew I was losing control, and no matter how hard I tried to hide it, everything inside me had been crumbling for a long time. I kept smoking, another cigarette, another. The smoke kept rising into the air, and I felt myself drifting away from life itself with each exhalation. Time was losing its shape, like a soap bubble that had burst at some point, and I didn't know how to blow it up again. I woke up when I wanted, and I went to bed when I wanted. Sometimes everything got mixed up, and I couldn't tell where day ended and night began. Everything was floating, but I wasn't. The first couple of days, maybe weeks, I thought it was just a bad cycle. The worry, the stress. But then I realized I couldn't control myself anymore. I couldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried. It wasn't just a desire. It wasn't just an attraction. It was more than that. Every breath of smoke was like a sip of salvation. It was like I was searching for that part of me that was once alive, and instead I was becoming empty. It felt like I was starting to dissolve in the smoke. Somehow I slept a couple of hours a day, but each morning, it got worse. Sleep was alien to me. When I closed my eyes, scenes arose before me that I tried to brush off. They did not leave me. In every moment of fear, tension, every worry became part of my dream. When I finally opened my eyes, everything returned. Ash, coffee, cigarettes, and again, the same emptiness. But there was something strange. I was starting to notice things that hadn't been familiar to me before, like the ceiling fan, which seemed alive, and the strange feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. It was like watching, and the light, it seemed to be changing, or I was changing. I couldn't tell. The smoke was thick, and everything around me was starting to move, to distort. Even the reflection in the microwave was starting to look at me with some strange interest, as if I were a funny sight to it. "Are you still awake?" I thought I heard it. It was like it knew me. It was annoying and scary. I just laughed, sipping my coffee. A laugh so dry and cocky it was hard to believe. But I liked the sound. It was my ally. It told me I was alive, at least for that moment. Days passed, and I continued to slide along the line between reality and illusion. On the 5th day, everything broke, but I didn't realize it. Everything just disappeared. I lost track of time. I didn't care anymore what day it was, how many hours I had lived, how much time was left. All I knew was that I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop smoking. I couldn't stop drinking coffee. And I couldn't stop thinking about how things had gotten the way they were. Why was I here in this endless circle that now seemed unbearable? After the 5th day, when I almost passed out from the pain in my chest, everything changed. Everything began to distort. My steps became uncertain, as if I were walking on quicksand, and every movement was heavy, as if I was dragging something heavy behind me. Night did not come, day did not come, and everything around me was compressed, as in some nightmare. I lost my bearings, and every object in the room seemed alien to me. Perhaps it was the ceiling fan that suddenly started up at a higher speed. Or was it the coffee machine that laughed every time I tried to make coffee? I didn't know. I didn't know what was happening anymore. I began to be haunted by hallucinations, and if before they simply came and went, like shadows in the darkness, now they filled every corner of my apartment, as if all the objects and things around me began to live their own lives. And not only that, they began to speak to me. They spoke my words, mixed, mutated, distorted, as if they were trying to escape from the very depths of my mind. Sometimes I thought it was me talking to them. Sometimes they to me. Or maybe it was me trying to find answers to questions that did not exist. I don't know. Cigarettes were my allies, but they also became my enemies. They never left me. They followed me like persistent shadows. I remembered closing my eyes one day and seeing them dancing on the floor, walking on matchstick legs. I heard them whisper, "One more, Chris. One more." I shuddered. Fear gripped my chest. All I could do was light a cigarette. I couldn't resist. I reached for the cigarette. It burned like fire, but even its fire couldn't warm me. It only left an emptiness in its wake, as if everything inside me was simply disappearing with each exhalation. I knew this wasn't just an addiction, not just a habit. This was a part of me, my disease, my punishment. The days went on, but the night never came. Sometimes it seemed to me that I was not sleeping at all. My eyes could not close. I tried to find silence, but everything was too noisy. Strange sounds, the ticking of a clock, which became louder and louder, as if it were approaching me. The clanking of dishes in the kitchen. The noise of fans, which for some reason began to remind me of someone's footsteps. I felt the space around me begin to shrink. Everything became larger. Everything became closer. But the worst thing was that I was losing my sense of reality. My reflection in the microwave, which once simply showed me my face, was now starting to look at me with some kind of sinister grin. I tried not to look at it, but it wouldn't let go. "Are you still awake?" I heard, as if someone was laughing at me. And at that moment, I didn't know who was saying it, me or the image frozen in the microwave glass. It was starting to piss me off. I didn't know what to do, and I smoked. With each new breath, I felt like I was falling deeper into this world I had created for myself. A world where there was no room for simple things. A world where coffee and cigarettes became my gods, demanding more and more. I couldn't stop. I couldn't refuse. I was a prisoner of these habits, and cigarettes became my chains. The condition was growing. My movements were becoming more and more nervous, and I felt a fog in my eyes. It did not go away. It seemed that everything around me was beginning to disappear, and only I remained in this vacuum. I sat on the couch, not understanding where I was. Everything around me was blurring, and I did not know how to get out of this labyrinth. What had once been a simple process became strange and overwhelming. I was too tired to fight it. When I tried to sleep, I would close my eyes, but they would open right away. And at some point, I realized that maybe this wasn't a dream. This was something else. I saw the space around me changing, and the ceiling and walls seemed to move, stretching and contracting, as if the room itself was a living thing. It was terrifying. I saw things that couldn't be explained. I tried to leave them behind, but they wouldn't go away. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just a prisoner of my own thoughts. I was a prisoner of my own mind. It got worse with each new day. I felt my legs dragging heavier and heavier across the floor, as if they were sinking into a viscous liquid from which it was impossible to escape. It was like being underwater. Thoughts, like bubbles, rose to the surface, and I, absorbed in this fog, could not catch them. The world had become too big, and I was too small to change anything in it. It had been over a week since that day when I almost lost consciousness, but I still hadn't felt any relief. Every morning I woke up with a heavy feeling, as if someone was literally holding me by the throat, and I couldn't free myself. I didn't have the strength to get out of bed or think. I just sat there staring into the void. Life had become gray, as if the whole world was painted in shades of brown and gray. There was no warmth, no cold, only a cold emptiness. Everything around me was completely insignificant, as if I had found myself in some endless desert where there had been no people or animals for a long time. Every time I tried to do something simple, like pour myself a cup of coffee, I found that I couldn't do it. My hands weren't mine. They were shaking. Their movements were slow, as if they didn't belong to me. I was losing touch with myself. Sometimes it seemed to me that I had ceased to be a person at all and had become just a shadow walking around an empty apartment. I tried to remember what it was like when things were simpler. When I was just Chris Whitman, a young man who lived and worked, had joys and sorrows, but always found the strength to move forward. But I couldn't remember what that was like. The memories were slipping through my fingers like sand, and I didn't know where to look for them. The night was falling more slowly. When I felt the dark clouds thickening in my mind, I knew that I would not sleep again. I saw my hallucinations becoming more vivid, as if I were in some kind of nightmare where every object could become alive. Once again, standing by the window, I noticed how shadows from the corners began to crawl along the walls. I tried to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, but inside I knew they were moving on their own. The shadows began to take shape, and then I saw them. Strange, indistinct, like ghosts from the past. They stood next to me, and I could hear their breathing. I closed my eyes. I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to hear it. But the shadows kept moving in time with my thoughts, their hands reaching out to me as if trying to grab me by the shoulders. I mentally pushed them away, forcing myself to remember that I was alive. But there was no point. They wouldn't let me go. What scared me most was the thought that I was no longer in control of what was happening. These shadows were a symbol of my inner destruction. They became my companions. I could not stop them because I myself had become part of this nightmare. These hallucinations were not just dreams. This was a reality that I created myself, having lost control over myself. One night I realized I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't live with this rift inside me, this scream echoing in my head. I had to change something. I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. I woke up this time in a cold sweat, as if I was completely enveloped in a fog. My heart was pounding and my breathing was shallow. I got out of bed and went to the bathroom, barely understanding how I ended up in this room. My hands were shaking again, and I couldn't understand what was happening to me. I looked in the mirror. My reflection was almost unrecognizable. My face was gaunt. My eyes were red and inflamed. My hair was tangled, and there were dark circles on my neck. I had lost weight, and my body felt alien, not mine. I didn't see myself. I saw only what I had become, this emptiness that had long ago swallowed me up. You know what was scary? I didn't feel fear, just emptiness. It was like watching everything you love burn away. It wasn't pain. It wasn't tears. It wasn't a sense of loss. It was a feeling of becoming less than you were, of losing yourself. How did I end up here? Why did I lose myself? How much time do I have left? But there were no answers, only emptiness and sounds that seemed so real to me that I could no longer distinguish them from reality. But then I felt pain, like a flash. It was not physical. It was a pain in the soul that screamed for help. I realized that I could not stay in this place, that I could not continue to exist in this way. At that moment, I made a decision. I didn't know what to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't stay in this hell. I had to find a way out. And maybe that started with just stopping. Stopping and admitting that I couldn't fight this alone. I decided I needed to get help. I couldn't fight the demons of my mind alone anymore. I had to take the first step. How long have I been putting this off? How long have I been hiding my pain behind cigarette smoke, behind deafening silences and empty gestures that were supposed to seem normal? The constant "I can handle it" that I repeated to myself in solitude became an invisible chain that fettered my freedom. I tried to convince myself that this was just a temporary weakness, that I could handle it myself, that I didn't need anyone to be strong. But weakness isn't just something temporary. It's something you have to learn to live with, to acknowledge your vulnerability. And I finally realized that my silence wasn't protecting me, but rather it was depriving me of the opportunity to get myself back. The letter I wrote on my phone was the first step. It wasn't addressed to anyone in particular, but in it I acknowledged everything that was happening to me. I wrote about how long it had been since I felt alive, how long it had been since I knew how to laugh or feel joy, how fear and anxiety had become a part of me, not a part of the outside world. This letter was the only way I could begin to open up. I didn't know what exactly I was supposed to do with this confession, but I knew it had to be said, even if it was just a monologue to myself. After I sent that letter, I felt a strange relief, as if a small weight that had been pressing on my chest had suddenly been lifted. It was a strange but important feeling, not of victory, but of acceptance. I was no longer running from my problems. I was ready to face them. A few days later, I finally took the step I had been putting off for a long time. I signed up for counseling. Admitting that I needed help was the hardest, but also the most important decision in this process. I decided that I wouldn't wait for miracles, that I couldn't handle this on my own, that I didn't want to perish in my own despair. The day I called the clinic, I felt the stigma of shame being lifted from me. All these years, I lived with the idea that I could not show vulnerability. I thought I had to be a strong person who could not be broken. But this turned out to be the biggest mistake. Each step was a step toward healing. I told myself that it was in this step, this very asking for help, that true strength lay. Not being able to bear the weight of my demons alone was not a sign of weakness. It was a sign that I still wanted to live, that I was not ready to give up. When I walked into my first consultation, everything felt foreign and uncomfortable. Sitting in that neutrally cool room, I felt like I was in some kind of lab experiment. I was surrounded by soft chairs, dim lighting, and the smell of coffee. Nothing that made me feel comfortable, but I was there. I had arrived, and that was already a big step. I looked at the psychologist, a middle-aged woman whose eyes seemed to see more than I could ever show. She took her time with my answers and allowed me to remain silent when I couldn't find the right words, and that was important. I didn't have to justify myself. I didn't have to prove anything. I could just be. I told her how hard it was to breathe, how I couldn't fall asleep at night because of my thoughts, how cigarettes became my only friends. I told her about the emptiness that swallowed everything around me and the hallucinations that haunted me. I couldn't hold back my tears. Sometimes they weren't tears of pain, but tears of release, as if I was pulling something out of myself that had been inside for a long time, but I didn't know how to express it. At that moment, I felt something new, calm, strange, but quite tangible. And although it was only the first lesson, I knew that I had made the right choice. I didn't know how long it would take me to recover, but at least now I knew that I had a chance to get yourself back. I left the clinic that day feeling heavy, but not helpless. I couldn't forget that I had just shared my inner demons with someone else, but it was exactly what I needed. It was my first step toward recovery. I didn't know how many more steps lay ahead, but I was ready to go without looking back. On the way back home, I didn't immediately notice how everything around me had become a little brighter. Maybe it was the effect of one conversation, of allowing myself to be vulnerable. Maybe just by exhaling, I released some of what was weighing me down. But there was still a lot more to come on this journey. A month passed, and I was no longer the same person as 3 weeks ago. Time had passed, but the world around me had not changed. The same city, the same streets, the same smell of cars and asphalt that I had always hated. However, I began to notice little things that had simply not existed for me before. The sky became brighter, despite all its clouds, and even the bitter smells of city life now seemed part of something alive, and not a viscous liquid that I swallowed with every breath. I no longer hurried to hide cigarettes in my pockets or hide from people in my house. Yes, I still smoked, but it was no longer my only way of coping with life. I still caught myself reaching for a cigarette, but now it was conscious. I could acknowledge it, and that was a victory. Every morning I woke up at first light, trying to tear apart the routine of the day to find something for myself. And not only outside the house, I began to really see the people around me, their faces, expressions, gestures. I noticed how children played in the street, how old people walked slowly along the sidewalks, embracing their memories, how mothers with strollers passed by cafes. All this began to seem valuable to me. There was always more to life than I could perceive due to my own fear and isolation. But it wasn't that simple. I didn't yet believe in my ability to truly change. I continued to follow the same old paths. I ran into old acquaintances, and in their eyes I saw a mixture of pity and interest, the inevitable consequence of my last months. They didn't say it out loud, but I felt like they were asking me what I was capable of. Could I be myself again? Or had I already strayed too far from who I used to be? I didn't know the answer. But at that point, I didn't need that answer anymore. I just walked. I started walking more. I started reading books I'd been putting off for a long time. I kept a journal where I wrote down my thoughts without trying to analyze them or make them meaningful. I just wrote. And surprisingly, it helped me. My return was much more painful than I had imagined. I had no control over everything that was happening inside me. Sometimes I woke up feeling like I didn't belong. This feeling, foggy and thick, filled every corner of my life. But I kept going, despite its weight. Sometimes I felt like I knew this fog, like it was something old and familiar, something I had known since childhood. But now I knew I couldn't let myself drown in it again. I didn't know how to get out of it, but I knew I was going. The healing process was not a straight line, but rather a trek along a thorny path that I faced daily. But I was not alone. Every day I tried to learn how to be human again, a simple human being who simply exists without necessarily proving his or her worth. It was hard, always battling inner demons that I wished I could leave behind. But I kept going, taking each step. Each day, I started going to the clinic again. I saw a psychologist every week, and although I still felt vulnerable, I no longer felt embarrassed by these meetings. I realized that I was safe there, in the office. It was a territory where I didn't have to play the role of being strong and independent. I could just be a person who needed help. But those moments when I was alone, like now, sitting in this cafe, were especially hard. There was no psychologist, no people to support me. I was alone with myself. That was the scariest part. My loneliness is not the loneliness I chose, but the one that leaves no room for hope. Now, sitting at this table, I thought about how much I had been through lately. I couldn't say that I had won yet, but I began to notice little islands of calm appearing around me. They weren't instant joys, but they were appearing. The sky, books, walks, all these little things began to return pieces of themselves to me. I got up and went back home. Step by step, day by day. I knew it would be a long road, but at some point I realized that every step is important, no matter what it looks like. When I found myself back on my couch, hugging my coffee cup, I looked at the clock. Time was ticking, but I no longer felt its pressure. I was living, and that was something that mattered. I woke up alone. The sounds of the city filtered into the room, but they seemed so far away, as if I were in another world. I couldn't tell exactly how much time had passed since I began my journey to myself. It was hard to estimate, but what I did know was that every day was a struggle. Sometimes I won, sometimes I didn't. At night when I tried to sleep, I felt its heavy presence filling my thoughts again. Nicotine. It hadn't gone away. It was there, close by, like an old friend I couldn't shake off. I knew it was only a matter of time before it returned to offer me another cigarette, as if there had never been a break between us. Sometimes I found myself reaching for the pack again, but each time I slowed down, took a step back, and it felt like a small victory. That day, I felt like I needed to get out, far away, not just a walk around the block like I had been doing for the past few weeks, but somewhere far away. I decided to go to the park, a place where there were no other people, where I could be alone with myself and my thoughts. The park was quiet, birds were singing, and leaves were crunching underfoot. I realized with surprise that I hadn't paid attention to such things in a long time. It was all part of life that I had once simply ignored. I stood by the lake, watching the sun reflect in its water. It was a beautiful sight, and it made me stop. I thought, this is real peace, not the bustle of the city, not the noise, not the addiction to tobacco. A simple state of silence that I hadn't felt in a long time. I didn't know how long I stood there, but it was long enough to feel like I was coming back to myself, to the parts of myself that had been lost along the way. I began to realize that I couldn't live with these chains forever, and while I wasn't ready to completely shed them yet, I knew that one day I would. After the walk, I felt a little different. Maybe it wasn't a change, but at least it was a start. I went home, and when I sat down on the couch again, I realized it wasn't the same couch I'd sat on a month ago. It wasn't the same place. It didn't enclose me. It didn't try to swallow me. Then I made a decision. I decided that I would not seek refuge in cigarettes again. I would not seek solace in old habits again, because I knew I did not need them back. I was too close to finding something more valuable, my freedom. I started reading again, seriously, not to fill a void. I picked up an old book I once loved but hadn't held in my hands for a long time. It was about life, about its meaning, and about the importance of being true to yourself. I read and thought about what was yet to come, about the importance of not just surviving your life, but understanding its value. Cigarettes wouldn't give me that understanding. Time wouldn't come back, and I couldn't afford to waste it again. I felt that now I understand how important it is to live truly, not through pain and not through illusion, but in a state where I can be honest and open with myself. This was the first step towards a long-awaited change. That evening, as I sat in my chair again, lost in thought, I realized that now I needed to give myself a chance to start over, a chance to not be the person who was once tied to his habits and addictions, but to become someone new, someone who is capable of not only feeling, but also living, to truly live. I lay down in bed, placing the book on the nightstand, and although I was still haunted by old memories and cravings, I felt the weight lift. It was as if I had given myself permission to live again. Morning came quickly, not giving me time for long reflections. I woke up, and the first thing I felt was not the usual discomfort, not the itching all over my body, not the craving for cigarettes. I felt something else, lightness. Perhaps this was the first day when I did not wake up with the thought that I needed to smoke, as if I could not start the day without it. I got out of bed and went to the window. Beyond it stretched the street, people walking along the sidewalks, some riding bicycles, some hurrying to work. It was an ordinary morning, no different from any other. And yet, for me, it was special. It was new. I saw it differently. As if during my journey, I had acquired a new outlook on the world. My gaze returned to the book on the nightstand. I picked it up again. This time I took my time. I read slowly, trying to fully absorb the meaning of each word. And suddenly I realized that I needed more. I needed to do more than just seek solace in reading or walking. I needed to get up and move forward. I couldn't stay in this state all the time, as if there was a barrier between me and the present. I couldn't be who I used to be all the time. I remembered that I used to love drawing. I used to draw as a child, but over the years I had abandoned it, like many other things that brought me joy. I decided that it was worth a try. It was not an easy decision, but it was an important one. I opened the closet, took out my old supplies, and began. I did not know how it would turn out, but I knew that if I did not start, I would not know. For the first time in my life, I didn't care if I would succeed. It didn't matter how good my work would be. What mattered was that I started something. Every stroke, every color on the canvas became important to me. It was like I was returning to something real, something that had been forgotten and lost long ago. It wasn't just drawing, it was reclaiming myself. Every day it became easier for me. Fewer and fewer thoughts about cigarettes, less and less about filling the emptiness with something external. There was more and more space to do what was important to me, for myself. At some point, I realized that I hadn't felt so alive in a long time. Not just existing, but alive, fully aware of what was happening around me, with clarity in my eyes and mind. I could enjoy silence again, without the fear that this moment was about to disappear. I could be here, in this moment, and not be afraid that it would go away. By the time I finished my next drawing, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't continue hiding in the habits of the past. I knew that addiction to something wasn't the answer. It was just a temporary way to cope with something you didn't want to feel. But real progress starts with feeling it. I looked around the room that had once seemed like a dark corner of my world. It wasn't like that anymore. Everything seemed clear. I knew this wasn't the end. This was just a new phase. And maybe it was the best moment of my life. The moment I decided to leave everything behind. I may still have a long way to go, but now I knew I wasn't alone. I had myself, and that was enough. Story 1. When I was just 7 years old, the elders of my tribe began telling us stories. We sat around the fire, their voices blending with the whisper of the wind, the fire dancing, reflecting the fire in their eyes. I remember one day, an elder wrapped in a blanket of wool looked at us with tired eyes and spoke of Putini. "Listen, my children," he said. "In ancient times, there was a beast far more terrible than any monster you can imagine. His name was Putini, and he was the terror of the night, the nightmare of every living creature who dared to set foot on the land he guarded." We children, as if enchanted, stared at the old man, unable to look away. I was afraid, but I felt that there was a truth hidden in these words, so ancient and powerful that it permeated everything around. Putini was no ordinary animal, he continued, his voice lower, almost a whisper. He was a Tanawa, created by the gods themselves to watch over this world. He lived in the waters of Wyomio, but his power extended far beyond the sea. Putini's fearsome, scaly flesh was invisible in the dark waters, and his eyes were like two bright flames, burning everything in their path. I sat in the shadows, pressing my fingers to my lips, trying to hold my breath. I had always heard of this creature, but I never thought it was real. All those stories seemed like myths, told by elders to keep us children alert. But now I felt my breathing become heavy, and something dark and ancient was awakening in my heart. But Putini wasn't always like this, the old man continued, his face turning serious. Once upon a time, he was kind. He protected our lands from other monsters, protected our villages, helped us survive in the darkest times. But one day his mind began to change. He became more cruel, more sinister. He took people, not because he liked it, but because an unknown power was awakening within him. He began to manipulate our hearts, luring us into dark waters with his cries for help. My head was boiling with thoughts. I could not imagine how a creature that had once helped could turn into such a monster. But the old man continued, and his words, like rusty nails, pierced my soul. In the night, Putini sounded like a man, as if he was calling for help. We heard his screams, his cries, and each time one of us followed him, thinking that it was a disaster, that someone needed help. But in fact, it was only his deception. He took us to his kingdom, and those who followed him disappeared forever. In this story, I felt the old evil hidden in this creature, still stirring somewhere in the dark corners of the world. We were all captives of his manipulations, his magic. I had a feeling that I needed to do something, that I too could become a victim if I was not careful. When Maui learned of this, he decided to put an end to Putini's reign. He knew he couldn't fight him directly, because this beast was not just an animal. It was created by divine forces and had supernatural powers. But Maui was not just a demigod. He was cunning and resourceful. He found a way to catch Putini, to force him to retreat, and only then, After a long struggle, the world became safe for people again. I felt the weight that had been on my chest for so long finally lift. We always told stories about Maui, who fought monsters and gods, but this story about Putini, about how a creature could turn from protector to monster, stayed with me for a long time. I thought about how evil can hide not only in the forms we are used to seeing, but also in the most unexpectedly ordinary places. But remember, my children, the elder continued, and I was brought back to the present. Putini did not disappear. He did not die. He remained in this world, hidden under the waters, in the depths of the oceans and rivers. His spirit lives in the dark waters, and we do not know when he will return. After these words, the old man became silent, and I felt his words swallow me up. I looked at the water of the river that flowed peacefully at the foot of the mountain, and for a moment I thought I saw something dark in the depths of the water. I didn't know what it was, but I knew one thing. Putini never disappears. He is always near, and one day he may return. The next day when I woke up, the morning sun had not yet risen. Darkness enveloped the land, and there was a strange feeling as if the night had not ended. I stood at the edge of my village, looking towards the river. The water flowed slowly, but deep in its dark waters, I seemed to sense the presence of something ancient and sinister. The old man spoke of Putini, but not all the stories about him were complete. There were details that were never told. That Putini was not just a myth, but a being who was not destined to disappear. These thoughts haunted me all night. I could not understand what exactly was bothering me so much, but deep down I felt that these stories were not random. Why me? Why does this always repeat itself? There was no joy or fear in my soul. There was something deeper, something inexplicable. That day the elders gathered in the village, and as usual I went to them to hear more stories. But this time something was different. I noticed that they did not look at each other as before. Their gazes were clouded, their conversations quiet and tense. I struggled to get into the circle, and as soon as I stood next to them, one of the elders, Cato, noticed me. "You didn't seem to listen to the end," he said, his voice hard, like a stone that held something hidden. He looked at me for a long moment, and in his eyes I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. "Do you know what happens to people who are too interested in the past?" I froze. I hadn't expected him to speak to me like that. It wasn't just a warning, it was a warning. I knew what he meant. The village had lived in the shadow of that ancient legend for a long time. We could talk about many things, but not about what really bothered us. It was like a curse that could not be forgotten, but also could not be revealed too much. Sometimes, Cato continued, life itself finds those who cannot give up the search, those who decide to awaken what should have long remained dormant. I didn't know what to say. His words touched something deep inside me, something I couldn't understand. He wasn't talking about magic or myths. He was talking about something far more dangerous, something that was truly hidden from our eyes. I walked away from the elders and toward the river. The water was clear, but this time I noticed its surface changing. It was as if dark shadows were moving across it, despite the fact that there was no wind or movement of the water. I leaned down to get a better look, and then I saw it. At first it was just a glimpse, a shadow that blended into the dark bottom, but then it seemed to grow, taking on a shape that seemed familiar. I recoiled. It wasn't just a shadow. It was a figure, tall with long limbs that didn't look normal. I knew if I kept looking, it would be impossible to go back. I ran. I ran like I had never run in my life. My whole body was tense, and my heart was pounding like a hammer, knocking my breath out of my lungs. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was chasing me, something sinister, slowly approaching. When I returned to the village, my feet were bleeding and my breathing was out of control. I was ready to tell everyone what I had seen, but at that moment I realized that no one would believe me. They had not seen what I had seen. No one could understand what it was. Everyone in the village went about their business as if nothing had happened. But I knew. I knew that the river held not only stories about Putini, but something far more dangerous. And what I saw was not just a vision, it was a warning. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to every sound around me. And in that moment I realized I had become part of this history. Putini was not just a myth. He was an integral part of my past, my people, and now I was in his hands. In the depths of the night I heard a noise, as if someone was walking through the village. I looked out the window, but there was no one there. Only shadows hiding behind the trees. Too much shadow for this village. Suddenly I realized that the shadows were too close. I felt this darkness coming for me, and I knew there was no turning back. When I decided to set out on a journey to meet this creature that had taken so many lives, I had only one goal in mind: to avenge my people and bring back those Putini had taken. There was only silence around me, broken only by the occasional crunch of branches under my fingernails as I carefully made my way through the dense undergrowth. All I knew was that I had to reach the great Wyomio River, where this beast lived. Legends of it had been passed down through generations, and I knew I should not be afraid. But doubts haunted me. My thoughts were of the people Putini had taken, of those who had been devoured on dark nights when the rivers roared and the sky was covered with clouds. I had heard stories of how the tribes, despite their wisdom and strength, could do nothing against this beast. It was powerful, like no other creature in these lands. Its spines glittered in the sun like spearheads, and its body was so huge that it could be mistaken for a mountain or a cloud. And as for its language, even the bravest warriors could not help but tremble when they encountered it. But I was no ordinary man. I was Maui. I was a demigod. And if anyone could stop this beast, it was me. I approached the river where Putini was said to sleep. The water was calm, broken only by the occasional splash of a fish. Suddenly, I felt strange. In these waters, I sensed not only life, but also something dark. It was as if the river itself held a secret. I looked at its surface, feeling my heart squeeze with anticipation. Right here, I thought, and immediately threw off my clothes, preparing to meet this terrible beast. My body filled with power, and I felt how not only physical strength, but also the power granted by the gods was awakening within me. I stepped into the water, feeling its coldness envelop my skin. There was a silence all around, almost ominous. The river didn't just flow, it pulled me in, like a magnetic influence lurking at its deepest levels. I knew Putini was here, in these waters, in these dark and predatory currents. With each step I took, I went deeper into the river. The water hugged my legs deeper and deeper until I felt like I was standing waist deep in its icy embrace. My heart beat faster and faster, and I sank deeper into this feeling, as if the world around me was about to fall apart and the river would swallow me whole. But the moment I took another step, the silence was broken. The water rumbled and splashed, and I felt something heavy rising from the dark depths. The water surged, and at that moment I felt an eerie presence. It was more than just a beast. It was a symbol of fear for all the inhabitants of these lands. A powerful creature was rising to the surface. I felt the beast approach me, and its gaze was sharp as a knife, full of malice and menace. Putini was not just a beast. He was the embodiment of the anger and fury of these lands. I felt his eyes pierce me, and his roar echoed in my heart. He was ready to destroy everything in his path. As it rose from the water, its spines glittered in the faint light falling from the sky, like terrible weapons poised for battle. It was enormous, and its every movement was menacing. I knew that if I was not careful, I would not leave this place alive. I picked up my fish hook, knowing that only with it could I win. But the battle itself was not that simple. Putini could change his size and shape. He could be a gigantic beast, but he could also become incredibly fast and agile. This was a test, and I was ready to take it. I threw the hook towards Putini, hoping to hit him. The moment the hook sank into his body, the beast let out a monstrous roar, and his gigantic mass shifted as if the earth itself were shaking. He tried to break free, but the hook held him, and I knew that this moment was decisive. My goal was clear. I was not simply fighting him. I was fighting for my land, for my people, for everyone who had suffered at his hands. Putini twitched, and I felt his power pressing down on me. He was fast, impossibly fast, but I was ready. I used all my experience and strength to hold on to the hook that was still embedded in his eldritch form. My breathing quickened, but I knew that this moment would decide everything. This was not just a fight for me. This was a fight not just with a creature, but with the very shadow that haunted my people, and I was ready to win. With each movement, I felt myself becoming more and more tense, as if the world around me was becoming part of this battle. I couldn't afford to doubt it. This fight was not just about fighting Putini, but about what he represented. With each passing moment, I felt him growing stronger, his energy seeping into me, and I began to understand that he was more than just a beast. He was a creature that fed on suffering, and his strength grew from the pain and fear he left behind. As its spikes slid towards me, I quickly dodged, but was unable to avoid one of its strikes. The blade of a spike pierced my hand, and I felt a chill run through my body. Suddenly, the pain became unbearable, and I felt blood slowly trickle down my arm. But instead of retreating, I took a deep breath, and the strength that the gods had given me filled me anew. I gritted my teeth and tore my hook from the beast's body, feeling its bloody remains clinging to the weapon. Putini roared. His roar echoed through every corner of the land, and I felt the ground beneath me shake with his rage. But it could not stop me. I knew that if I did not defeat him here, he would continue to kill, and my kingdom, my people, would remain in his shadow. I was more than a warrior. I was Maui's heir, and my strength lay in my spirit, in my determination. I could and would win. The beast reared back. Its spine straightened, and it struck me with its powerful tail. The blow was terrible, and I felt myself thrown to the side. My body responded to the pain, but I could not allow myself to fall. To stand, to fight, not to stop. That was what was needed. I struggled to my feet, feeling myself filled with rage and despair. This was the final battle, the final test I had to endure. All that was left in my hand was my hook, but I knew that this weapon was not simply made to kill. It was a part of me, a part of the power I had been given. I looked into Putini's eyes, his yellow eyes full of malice and ancient wisdom, and I knew that he was not only a monster, but also a symbol of an ancient evil that had to be destroyed once and for all. I gathered all my will into a fist and rushed forward again. He roared, ready for another attack, but I was not afraid. The moment his claws tore through the air with a crack, I jumped, closing in on him. In that moment, time seemed to slow down. I saw his teeth rising to meet me, but I could not retreat. The force that passed through me led to the decisive moment. I put all my heart into the blow, and my hook, flashing, sank into his chest. Putini screamed, his roar filling the space around him. But it was not just a sound of pain. It was a scream of fear, because I knew I had won. He began to writhe like a snake, trying to escape, but his strength was already running out. I felt his body begin to lose its shape. It was shrinking like an empty shell, and soon only his shadow remained before me, an empty shell, devoid of strength and power. I stood in the misty light, breathing hard, but feeling completely victorious. Putini was no longer a threat. This was not just the end of the battle. This was liberation, for me, for the land, for my people. I knew that this moment would change the fate of these lands forever, and now I was the one who had defeated the darkness. I looked around, listening to the sounds of silence that gradually filled the air. It was as if the earth itself had regained its breath, and this feeling of relief was wonderful. However, I knew that this victory was only part of a larger struggle that was still going on in the world. But today, in this moment, I was the winner. And even if new evil appeared on the horizon, I would be ready. The darkness was thick, like liquid darkness, as I found myself in this part of the forest, full of ancient trees whose roots dug deep into the earth like the paws of hidden animals. It was as if the forest itself knew that I was on the brink, that I had become a part of this place, and that here, in the shadows of these trees, my fate could change. I was alone, surrounded by secrets that I did not want to solve, but could not ignore. Nature was silent, but too meaningful. Every rustle of the wind, every movement of the leaves seemed like a foreshadowing, as if the forest was whispering secrets to me that I was not ready to hear. But I had no choice. I moved on, feeling more and more like my body and spirit were being consumed by something otherworldly, something I could not understand, but which I had to face. Suddenly, I thought I heard a whisper. It wasn't the sound of the wind or the rustling of leaves. It was a voice, soft and inviting, like a shadow in the night. It was calling me, urging me to turn to the side in the direction where the air was a little colder, the darkness thicker. I didn't know what awaited me, but I couldn't resist the urge to find out what was hidden in that shadow. My steps became slower and slower, as if the earth itself were pulling me, and then a figure appeared before me. It was not quite human, but not quite her either. The dark outlines fit tightly into the night shadows, and although the face remained hidden, I felt its presence. Oh, how I felt it. It was like an old memory, like something forgotten, but forever remaining inside. In her eyes, which glittered for a moment in the darkness, I saw something more than just a reflection of light. They were filled with an ancient power, as if she could penetrate the very depths of my soul and look into places I myself would rather forget. You came. Her voice was soft, but there was strength in it. I knew you would come. You couldn't avoid it. Her words awakened a strange feeling in me. I knew she was telling the truth. I was not here by chance. This place, this meeting, all of it was predetermined. But what exactly? What was I supposed to do? Why me? You know what has to happen, she continued, her voice becoming a little more insistent. You know you have to make a choice. That choice will change everything. I felt her words seeping into me. I knew there was some important meaning behind every word she said. But what was it? And why did I feel like I always knew it, even though I couldn't quite remember? You must decide who you really are. You have been holding back your fear, hiding your destiny, but the time has come. Time for a decision. Time for action. Every word she said seemed to explode in my mind. Everything around me began to change. The forest, the sky, the air, All of it was losing its shape and turning into something else, something strange and frightening. My mind was filling with fog, and images I couldn't understand were flashing before my eyes. I fought against it, trying to maintain control, but I knew I couldn't just be an observer anymore. I had to be a part of this. I had to act. What should I do? I barely dared to ask, but the voice in my head was full of fear and despair. I knew I couldn't afford to make a mistake. She only smiled, but her smile was full of mystery and ancient wisdom. "You've already made a choice," she replied, her face disappearing into the darkness again. "But only you can understand what that choice is." And so, in the blink of an eye, her image dissolved into the air like fog, and I was alone again, standing in this dark, mysterious forest. But now I knew that everything had changed. My choice had been made, although I could not understand what it meant. But I felt how this power that emanated from her now belonged to me. What was it? Who was she really? I didn't know, and perhaps I'll never know. But I felt that my destiny was now tied to this forest, to this mystical creature, and to the choices I would have to make. Taking a breath, I took a step forward, feeling something pulling me deeper into the forest, into its darkest corners. I already knew that now I would not be able to return. The fog began to thicken, and the forest around me became increasingly impenetrable. Every tree, every branch now seemed something more sinister than just a part of nature. I felt like an invisible force was pulling me deeper into this forgotten world, where I seemed to have ended up by chance or by some unknown necessity. My steps sounded heavy, as if the ground beneath my feet was not quite real, but rather part of some dream or nightmare. Time ceased to exist. I did not know how many minutes, hours, maybe even days had passed. Everything around was monotonous. Only leaves, darkness, and a whisper that could not be heard. But I could still feel it, penetrating my soul. With every step, the feeling that I was not alone grew stronger. Sounds that I could not quite identify followed me. These were not the usual sounds of the forest, not the quiet footsteps of animals, not the evening wind. No, it was something else. Something that moved behind me, like a shadow, like something that hid in the darkest corners of my thoughts. I tried not to think about it, kept walking, but inside me questions echoed. Why am I here? What brought me to this forest? And then again, the figure appeared before me, a silhouette, eclipsed by darkness. There could be no clear contrast, no line to understand what it was, just a shadow. It stood motionless, and I did not know who it was. I did not know what it could be or what it represented. I froze, feeling the cold hand of anxiety squeeze my heart, but I couldn't stop. I wasn't here to leave. I was here because I had to understand what was hidden in this place and what exactly I was looking for. Dark eyes, the gleam of which was barely discernible in this absolute darkness, began to follow me, and suddenly I realized that I could not leave. Not because I could not, but because I did not want to. I was here of my own free will, although a moment ago I did not even realize it. Step by step I approached this image, and with each step the fog became denser and the air heavier, as if it was trying to squeeze me, to make me turn back. But I couldn't. Something inside me kept me on this path. Suddenly the shadow began to move. Very slowly, it was getting closer, and it seemed to me that its movement was not just physical movement, but something much deeper, as if the darkness itself, the very nature of the forest, did not allow me to retreat. With each step, I felt the ground beneath my feet change. My body began to sink into this place, as if I were part of this world, part of the forest, part of these shadows. I stopped just a few steps away from her. There was no face to be seen, only a vague outline, like a thick shadow that could not be anything in particular. I still knew that this figure was there for a reason. It was part of something much larger than I could comprehend. The wind, as if sensing that this was a turning point, died down. Everything became even quieter. I could only hear my own breathing and the beating of my heart, which seemed to echo in this darkness. I realized that I had to take a step forward, enter this circle, this path from which there was no return. Time, which seemed endless, shrank into that moment. The shadow standing before me was still a mystery, but I knew I had to do something, decide something. This moment was important. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it couldn't be a coincidence. Without any obvious signs or movements, she began to disappear, dissolving into thin air, as if she had never been there. But her presence, her shadow, remained with me. I felt something changing, the very fabric of reality changing around me. I couldn't understand what it meant, but I knew one thing. I was standing on the threshold of something great, and my choice, which I didn't yet realize, had already been made. I stood in a misty forest, alone, but now I knew that I was no longer the same as I had been before. This forest, this shadow, all these events were a part of me, and I was a part of them. I stood among the trees and the whole world seemed strange, distorted. The darkness that surrounded me was not ordinary darkness. It was something alive, as if the darkness itself was watching me, evaluating my steps and movements. I felt the air around me growing heavier, as if I was plunging into something beyond comprehension. I did not know where I was going, but an inner feeling told me that the path would not be easy. The dark branches of the trees began to bend, as if their hands were trying to grab me. Every shadow seemed alive. Every movement in the forest filled me with anxiety. I understood that this place was not like other forests I knew. There was something here, incomprehensible, unimaginable. My steps were becoming more and more uncertain, and I felt like something or someone was watching me. If I hadn't been so stubborn, I would have turned back a long time ago, but something inside me was pushing me forward. I knew that this place was not accidental, that I was not here by chance, but because I needed to find something important. And then, in the very depths of the forest, among the oldest trees, I saw it, the shadow, the same one that had appeared before me earlier. This time it was more obvious, more distinct. It stood motionless, as if waiting for me. I felt the cold grip me, and although my legs were heavy, I still took a step forward. My whole being resisted it. I knew that if I got too close, I wouldn't be able to go back, but I couldn't stop. Like a magnet, she was pulling me, forcing me to move towards her. When I got close enough, I saw that it was not just a shadow. It was something more, something that defied logical explanation. Fog enveloped the figure, and even the light seemed to disappear around it. I couldn't make out what it was, but inside me there was a feeling that I knew what it was. It was something ancient, something from another reality. The shadow began to move. No, it didn't move, but rather seemed to blur, becoming part of the air itself. I couldn't look away because I felt myself being pulled, as if I could no longer control myself. Something about this figure forced me to be an inactive observer, even if I wanted to understand what was happening. I tried to take a step back, but my body wouldn't obey. Fear gripped me, but at the same time, a strange attraction appeared. I tried to free myself from this feeling, but it grew stronger. I stood before this creature, not knowing what it wanted, not knowing how to react. Suddenly, I felt that I was no longer alone. Other figures began to gather around me. These figures were like shadows, like the one in front of me, but they moved slowly and smoothly, as if they were part of the world itself. I could not understand where they came from or what they were doing here, but I knew that they were looking at me, observing. My fear grew. These shadows began to close in around me, as if I were at the center of their world. They weren't attacking, they were just there, filling the space with their presence. I felt the ground beneath my feet begin to shake, and I couldn't figure out what it meant. Something inside me began to tear apart, and I realized that I couldn't stay here. I had to find a way out, but where could I go? This place had no boundaries, and it seemed that I myself had become a part of it. I tried to regain control of my body, to make it move, but my legs wouldn't obey. Then I realized I shouldn't have tried to run. I should have understood that these creatures, these shadows, were part of something greater. I should have accepted them as part of this world. But what do they want from me? Why are they here? Why me? It was all so confusing, and every new movement of these figures only deepened my confusion. Suddenly, one of the figures approached me. The shadow was invisible and unclear, but I felt its approach. Something soft but deep slid over my body like a cold wind, but I could not move. I was chained to this place. The shadow raised its hand, and I could not look away. At that moment, I realized that everything that was happening here was not a coincidence. I was part of this history, part of something that was beyond my understanding. I became part of these shadows,